So welcome to How to Do a Great Presentation, Small Business Style. And why did we think that this was so very important is that, well, we've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, and we want to make sure that we have more good, if not great, presentations. So an example, I remember I was actually sitting down with someone who had been trying to start their own business for about 8 months, and I kept on pushing them to do a sales presentation. And just a spoiler alert, this is the bad or the ugly one. And he didn't want to actually get out there yet. He wanted to keep on refining his business because he was scared of showing people his baby. So he finally, 8 months later, did his first sales presentation. You can imagine I was not very pleased with that approach. And his first sales presentation, I asked him how it went. And he goes, "It was great. It was so good." I go, "Oh, how did you know?" And he said, "I know it was so good because I spoke for 55 minutes and I answered all their questions because they never asked me anything." Well, I'm sorry if you think that that sounds like a great presentation. The big thing, small business style, is you actually want to be interrupted. So in this webinar, unfortunately, I'm not going to be interrupted, but really that is the sign of a great presentation, is when people have questions for you and when they kind of jump in. And then on the opposite, a great presentation was this lawyer. We talked about this in our last newsletter. A lawyer basically had shown up to a networking event. She had been going to that for a couple of years, but every time she presented, she never actually got any rewards. So no new sales, no interest about her law firm. So she actually thought about and followed some of our best practices that we're going to be talking about today, about starting with her audience. And we really started thinking about who is going to be in that room. And because she'd been going to that networking event for months, she knew exactly who was in that room. She was able to cater her entire message to who was in that room. And guess what? After her presentation, she was flooded with interest and appointments and referrals from the people who were in the room. So good, bad, ugly, we'd rather be great. So let's jump into what we're going to be talking about today. So a great presentation. We have lots of information on Small Business Solver about presentations. If you have any other questions, just go to the search field and you'll be able to find any information about presentations. We're going to talk about the audience. So I already did that, spoiler alert too, but really understanding how to figure out who is the audience and some best practices. We're going to walk through the content of a great presentation and the things and the places where you should spend more time. Then we're going to talk about nerves. There's that old adage that, when you're at a funeral, more people would rather be in the coffin than at the front doing the eulogy because they're nervous of presenting. So we're going to definitely address nervousness because we don't want that to hinder our sales or our small business. And then the last bit, after you finish a presentation, how do you evaluate whether or not it was meeting your expectations? Was it good? And so we're going to walk through some of those pieces because remember the example of the person who thought it was a great presentation but wasn't interrupted. Well, that simply wasn't good enough. So the first part is our audience. The most important thing of any communications that we have is knowing your audience. Who is in the room? Who are they is important, but just as important and more so maybe is what do they care about? Because the worst thing that we can do is talk about things that our audience simply doesn't care about. Because guess what they do? They tune out. So a great example of audience. Let's say we're talking to an audience of mothers. What do they care about? They care about their children. They care about the safety of their children. They care about their family, let's say. Another audience could be maybe a banker, a commercial banker. And there's many different networking events or forums and conferences where you might be speaking to bankers. And what do they care about? Well, maybe they care about new clients or maybe people who need loans. So being specific on what our messaging is for them. And then another example would be if we're speaking to small business owners, what do they care about? Well, they care about saving money or getting new sales and making money. So we want to tailor our message for our audience and to what they care about. But then you go, wait a minute, sometimes I'm speaking at events that I have no idea who the people are. So the best example that I already gave was that lawyer who attended herself for many, many months before she was invited to be a presenter. Well, I mean, when she did her good presentation. And so you want, if you can do that, that's great. I understand that that's time consuming, so maybe that's not possible, especially if you're a keynote or if you're going and traveling for something. Probably you wouldn't have been able to go there multiple times. So another way to find out is to ask the organizers of the event, like, who is attending? Can you tell me something about them? Because the last thing you want to do is to talk about irrelevant things. And if they don't have that information, because it's just a hodgepodge of people who are showing up, then your last option here is to just show up early and fraternize with as many people as you can and ask questions so that when you stand on stage, when you do your presentation, you actually understand them. So why is this so important? I mean, I don't want to leave you hanging on there. Really, it's really important because sales are emotional and we want to understand the underlying values of the audience so that we can align with them and make sure that we're saying messaging that resonates with them. And values, how can you find that out? You could look on company websites about some of the attendees. You can enter the room and ask some probing questions, but you need to live out and show that you actually care about them, because that is also probably aligned with their values. Every sale is emotional. They only want to work with people that understand them and that they like and who resonates with them. So that's really the why behind knowing your audience in so many ways. And I have to say that every single thing that I've learned is probably because I did a mistake before. So knowing your audience is the most important thing. And I can even give a great example. I had a book launch and I thought that everyone should come to my book launch because it was on my birthday. Well, guess what? People didn't care about my birthday. They cared about meeting people that they wanted to meet. So nobody had pre-registered. I was all about me, which is not about the audience. I ended up sending out an email to all my friends and family and clients again for a book launch. And instead of saying it's about me, I said, everyone who pre-registers, I'll make sure that you're guaranteed to meet the top 3 people in the room that will benefit you. Within 24 hours, I had another 60 people registered. So when you think about your audience in any mechanism, in any tactic that you're using, it's always important, and definitely in presentations as well. Okay, so now that the audience is very clearly ingrained in you, we now go to content. And just some best practices as you think about content. The most important thing of any presentation is the beginning and the end. So the beginning is the hook, and it's really your first impression. So your hook should always be very, very simple. It should typically have some sort of number or ROI that you're doing. It should often have emotional language. And other tactics you can do in your hook is either a question or a story. So you saw today I gave you 2 stories. And there's some added advantages to stories, because if I was nervous and if you're doing a keynote, to start your hook with a story, it allows you to work the nerves out. Also, stories people remember a lot easier than anything else because we're story people. I mean, we've been telling stories for tens of thousands of years, and that was our primary form of communication. So our brain is actually wired to understand and remember stories. So whenever we can use them, that's always an added bonus. And then at the end, so many people forget the end. It's important to have an action or an authorization or a next step that is reasonable. So at the end of the presentation for the lawyer, she could have said, hey, if you want to have a coffee with me, I can let you know what type of risks you have for your small business. Here's my contact information, or I have cards at the front. So having something that is an action that's concrete, but not too preposterous. Like the lawyer wouldn't have said, and now you can sign the contract and I will be on retainer for you. That would have been way too far. So when you're thinking about your action, is it reasonable? And but make sure that you have one. Don't be shy about it. So your beginning and your end. And the nice thing at the end, everyone in the audience should know that you're done. You should never, ever have to say thank you. I mean, it is polite though. So the next part of your content is, what are you actually talking about? So you understand your audience now, you understand their values, you understand what they care about. And so when we're talking in our presentation, we're going to talk about some features, but we should mostly be talking about benefits where possible. So here's the thing. I've been talking about a lot of features. So you should do this, and you should do this, and this is how you do a hook. And yet I'm also talking about the benefits. So when I talked about the hook, I said, here's how you do it. Here's all the things that you can have, but why does it matter? What's the benefit to you? Well, people will remember it better. You've just made a positive impact. When you're at the front and you've done a great hook, people start cheering for you. So all of a sudden you have all these champions in the audience. So that's the benefit of having a great hook. But you as a presenter should be making sure that you're not just talking about features, you're also talking about benefits. Because remember, every single sale is emotional, and talking about benefits is going to be part of that emotional sale. So that leads nicely into the next one, is emotion in general. So benefits is important, but in our content of our presentation, can we use words that helps with the emotion? So the words like imagine, if, we're wasting money, we don't want to ruin this, or even the word awesome. Sometimes it's okay to show our personality. The pop piece from words, so it doesn't just need to be your words and your intonation. There's other ways to add pop or sizzle to your presentation. And this is really important because, again, it breaks up your presentation, and that allows people to remember the things that you wanted them to remember. So even a whisper could be pop. It sounds like the opposite of pop, but a whisper breaks up the conversation. You could have a prop or some sort of other action that you could do. I've seen people clap or stand up or sit down or jump around just to break up their presentation. And the other thing I just did, you can use pausing. So now that we kind of know who our audience is, we understand why that's important, we've really started to have content a little bit differently framed for us. And we're probably going to spend a lot more time on our beginning and end. How do we get rid of those nerves? Because maybe you're a great business owner, things are sailing for you, and you're starting to be invited to be on panels, and you're starting to be invited to present, but you know, it's nerve-wracking for you. What are some of the tactics to handle? First thing is breathing. Now, don't be fooled. This does not mean to take a deep breath at the beginning. In fact, studies have shown that taking a deep breath at the beginning could actually cause you to start hyperventilating, because a deep breath at the beginning is actually a shallow breath. So what you want to do is breathe out. Empty your diaphragm, allow it to refill, and then start presenting. So it's so funny because everyone says the opposite, but physically breathing out first is what allows you to present better. The next one is just own it. Nobody else knows your business, your content better than you. I mean, that's why you went into business, is because you're pretty confident that you know what you're doing. So you need to own it. Part of confidence is just making sure that you are doing the practice, which is really the next tip. But the other thing is, how do you own the stage? So what I do whenever I've been a keynote is that you never know when your body's going to take over and you start shaking. So I've known myself that what I need to do is, when someone is introducing me as a keynote and there's like hundreds of people in the audience, I stand up front. And during my introduction, I allow my nerves to dissipate. I've actually done this when I've taught college and university levels. If it was my first class and I had a lot of students, I would show up first and own the room. Even that strategy of talking to people in the room so you understand them, that actually helps you understand and feel more confident with them when you do finally go up to speak. So there's a couple pieces in there, but in general, I'm summarizing this as own it. And there's some good tactics that you can play around with. And then, of course, practice makes perfect. They say that it's 7 times. That's really going to help you just flow. They also say that the magic number is typically 20, but I find between 7 times to 20, your marginal benefit is not so huge. So a minimum of 7, 20, you're pretty much capped out. So just knowing and making the time, it doesn't matter how good of a presenter that you are, if you haven't practiced, people are going to notice. And if you have practiced, it's just going to be that much better. So the last question, we talked about audience, we talked about the content, we've talked about nerves, but was the presentation any good? So when you're in the presentation, let's say it's a sales one and you're around a board table with them, you can look at body language. So body language is pretty simple. People will lean in, people are maintaining eye contact, people are nodding their head, so they're actively listening. They can be smiling. These are all signs of body language. The tricky thing when you're doing sales that are business to business, so bigger sales with large companies, is that they often have buyers and decision makers who intentionally mask their body language. I've seen this many times where the entire board has decided to not throw me a bone. And so body language sometimes can be deceiving, so you really don't let it completely sway you. So the next thing to be looking for are the questions they've asked. And I've had people fool me on the body language, but the questions, you know if it was good or not. Because as soon as they start asking implementation or logistics questions, you know that they are interested. You know that you got your message across. So the questions are that piece that you know whether or not it was good. And the last thing is that when you've actually had an action, and if you're summarizing at the end of the presentation and coming up with an action plan together, no matter how far along it is, of course, that's going to be something that is your tip off to you. Even if it doesn't sound like a big action, like maybe it's like, oh, we'll start a pilot. A pilot is better than nothing. And a pilot means that they're actually interested. So you've definitely moved them along the continuum and down the sales funnel. So congratulations. So what we talked about was the audience, the content, the nerves, and whether or not it was good. And so just because they don't interrupt you doesn't mean it's good, unless it's a webinar and you've asked them not to do it. And just a reminder, this is from Small Business Solver. We are all about small business. We hope that you're able to go in, find any resources that you want. And thank you for joining us today. Oh, and I ended with a thank you. See, do as I say, not what I do.